afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jake, she's Hui Ting, and she's Stella. We are called Urban Farmers, and today we are going to present to you our proposal on how urban farming can actually solve some of the problems that we are identifying in Singapore. I'll be starting off with the background information and the problem, followed by Hui Ting, who will be bringing us through the solutions that we have came up with. Lastly, Stella will be going through the various benefits that our proposal promises to bring. To start things off, I'd like all of you to take a look at this picture. Many of you all might realize that this is actually a picture of children facing starvation in Africa. So you all might be thinking, what does this picture have to do with my presentation, which is actually based on Singapore? But first, I'd like each and every one of you think of this question. Would you want our future generations to end up like them? Moving on to background information, Singapore is an island nation of around 700 kilometers square in area. This area is actually supporting a population of about 5 million, give or take a few 100,000. Now, given this land scarce and high population density, our government has actually come up with an economy first strategy for land allocation. So under this strategy, right, we actually large areas of land is given to residential, commercial and industrial purposes, leaving us with only 6 kilometers square of land for food production. Obviously, such a tiny land area is not able to generate enough food to feed our population. So, over 90% of our food is actually imported from countries all over the world, such as Brazil, Australia, Malaysia, and China. With this, we are actually highly vulnerable to external factors that affect both supplies and prices of our food. For example, in 2006 to 2008, various crop failures around the world, coupled with the rise in global crude oil prices, actually raised global food prices significantly. In addition, food exporting countries such as the Philippines and India, which are main exporters of rice and spices respectively, actually placed embargoes on their food trade, refusing to trade with other countries for food. Even worse, Philippines hoarded a lot of rice in storerooms such as this. Now, this caused prices in Singapore to go up by a staggering 12.1%, which is highly significant even if you factor in other factors such as inflation. Now, with global unrest and crop failures happening all around the world, Singapore is poised to undergo radical changes in our food prices yet again. Now, many might argue that given Singapore's affluence, we are able to afford any rise in price. However, these people miss a point. What if, like 2006 to 2008, countries hoard their food and refuse to trade with us? What can our money do? So, the problem that we are facing now is that Singapore's food dependency on foreign imports of food is very, very serious, and they can cut off our supply at any time they want. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask you once again, would you want our future generations to end up like them? I'll pass on the presentation now to Hui Ting, who will bring us through the next part of it. Hui Ting, please.
Okay, thank you, Jake. Now I'll be covering on the proposed solutions of our project. But before I go on to talk about the solutions that my group has came up with, I'll first introduce these two important contributors to our project. They are Professor Lee Sin Kong. He's actually the director of NIE and also the pioneer of aeroponics in Singapore. Next is Professor Hugh Tan. He is actually from the Department of Biological Sciences in NUS, and he has also did intensive research in this field. So we did 2 interviews with them, and they has provided us with valuable insights into this topic. Okay, the proposed solution that our group has come up with is to incorporate urban farming in Singapore. And we have come up with a 4-stage approach to this. The first stage will be to increase awareness in urban farming. Why to increase the awareness? Because the general public will actually need to know what is urban farming before we can actually carry out the actual implementations. From our survey done with around 300 respondents, we found that 57% actually say no when we ask them if they are aware of the concept of urban farming. So, we propose to introduce public education campaigns which will actually raise the awareness and also inform the public about the benefits of urban farming. Universities and research institutions can also research on and publicize the benefits of urban farming to make the idea more appealing to the citizens of Singapore. Next, we actually found out that in Toronto, they actually did a cost-benefit analysis to actually inform the general public about the money they can actually save from introducing urban farming in their city. So I feel that Singapore government can actually do a similar cost-benefit analysis to show the citizens of Singapore how this can actually benefit our country. Okay, the second stage will be to minimize financial barriers to urban farming. Before we can actually implement urban farming in Singapore, we need to make sure that we have the financial capability to do this. So we propose for the government to introduce a green fund in Singapore. This green fund will actually provide incentives to building developers to actually introduce urban farming to their planning of future buildings. So this will actually encourage them to introduce urban farming in Singapore. And we also propose to provide funding for the research institutions to research on this field, the urban farming, to actually try to make it more cost viable for us to actually implement it in Singapore. And also to fund pilot programs to retrofit the existing buildings in Singapore with rooftop farming or urban farming. Okay, after the general public are aware of the urban farming itself and we make sure that we have the financial capability, we can go on to the actual implementation of urban farming. Okay, we propose to retrofit container farming in existing buildings. This container farming is actually introduced by Professor Hugh Tan because it is a low-cost approach as compared to the other agriculture methods like aeroponics and hydroponics. And actually minimal to no constructions is actually needed to retrofit these on existing buildings. More complex systems like aeroponics and hydroponics is actually not suitable to be used for retrofitting the existing buildings as told to us by Professor Lee in our interview, because those will actually require a lot of additional constructions and the existing buildings are actually not suitable for them. So we propose to retrofit the existing buildings with container farming. Okay, and like what I mentioned just now, the existing buildings actually cannot fit complex systems like aeroponics and hydroponics. So we actually propose to incorporate urban farming or rooftop farming into future developments such that they can actually introduce more complex systems to the future developments, future buildings. They can actually have the constructions needed when they first build up the building. So this can actually can provide more variety of crops in the future for our consumption. Okay, I'm done with my proposed solution. So now I'll pass on to Stella who will talk about the next part of the proposal. Stella, please.
Thank you, Hui Ting. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Now that you all have an idea of what urban farming, or specifically container farming, is all about, as mentioned by Hui Ting just now, I'd like to share with you the benefits that urban farming can bring to our food import dependent Singapore. First and most importantly, urban farming can alleviate dependency on food imports. A family of 4 living in a HDB flat can become totally self-reliant on vegetables with container farming and just using 15 containers. You may feel that 15 is a large number, but actually the container itself is quite small. And you can just place it around suitable areas in your homes that has adequate sunlight, such as your balconies or even your window sills. Imagine that if we utilize all the available areas in Singapore with container farming, up to 25% of domestic vegetable demand could be met. For large-scale areas such as rooftops, we can actually implement the more complex systems such as aeroponics or hydroponics to grow staples such as rice, and this will in turn reduce the amount of food that needs to be imported.